Hi everybody, we're going to start today with draping the bodice. We're working from at home in my basement studio. I know it's a little glary because I have bright lights down here, but that's what I need to be able to see. Normally you're going to be working in pencil, but because we're doing a lot of this online and it might be difficult to see, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be working with a marker so that you will be able to see what we're doing. So here's an example of a front bodice that's been draped to fit a small half-scale dress form. So I hope that everybody can kind of see the lines here a little better than if we'd done it in pencil. The first thing that you want to do is prepare your fabric. So you need to be able to work with a piece of fabric that's the right size and has the right markings on it. And so what we're going to do is you start out by taking some measurements. When you look at a dress form, this spot where the neck meets the shoulder, like right here, right there, is called the high point of shoulder. And we're going to measure from there down to the waist over the fullness of the bust to make sure that we are having enough fabric. And so if I place my tape measure at that high point of shoulder and I come down like this to the waistline over the bust, I can see that I need a minimum of 9 inches. But that's not going to give me enough fabric to actually work with. And so we want to add a couple of inches up at the top so that we don't short ourselves when we get into cutting our neckline. And we're going to add a few inches down at the bottom. So I would say at minimum you need 13, 14 inches the length of the fabric. So following the bolt along the selvage, you want that to be 14 inches. I've actually cut a piece that's 15 just to be on the safe side. Then you want to look at sideways, what's the width that we need? When you drape a bodice or any piece on your dress form, as long as you're making something that's symmetrical, you're only going to work from the center to the side. If you were doing something asymmetrical, then you would go the whole width. But right now, we want to start with the very basics. We're not doing something that's extremely creative. We're learning how to create a pattern block from the dress form for that basic bodice. So width-wise, we want to place our tape measure at the center, the very center. We want to come across the bust to the side seam. And I can see that right now that's like, a little more than 5 inches, 5.5. But we need to add an inch at the front to fold under, because you never want to work with the raw edge of the fabric because it can unravel and you could lose some of your dimension. And we need to bring some over the side so that we have something to manipulate. So for this piece, I've actually cut a piece of fabric that's 10 inches wide. So 10 by 15 is going to be a nice size for the front of the bodice. And you could actually cut the back at the same time. They'll pretty much be starting with the same size piece of fabric. So once you've cut your fabric, and the best way to do it is to cut the fabric at the selvage and rip it. When you rip the fabric, you're going to stay on grain. Grain line, as we go forward, you're going to learn to understand that the grain line is extremely important in draping. If it's off, it will affect the way your fabric drapes, and you may have difficulty in trying to form darts and other things if your fabric is off grain. So I would rip it into the shape that you need. And then the first thing that you want to do is we want to run a line down the center front at 1 inch over from the torn edge of the fabric or from the selvage. And like I said, if you want to work with a marker so that we can see it, I think that's a good idea. But typically, you wouldn't use a marker. You would use a pencil. And then you want to go over the iron. You want to fold that 1 inch under and press it so it's nice and crisp. And make sure that the rest of your fabric is pressed really crisp. You don't want any wrinkles because it's going to impede your ability to drape something because you're constantly trying to push the wrinkle out of it. The next measurement that we're going to take and work with is the bust placement. So the easiest thing to do is to take your piece of fabric and put it up on the mannequin, and you can see that I have this almost the length of the neck up here, because you got to have enough fabric to come around to the neck. If we drop this down like this, we're going to lose that whole corner of our shoulder. So you want to bring it up, and I would just pin it momentarily. When you're pinning, you always want to put the pins going in the opposite direction of the fabric. If I was to pin it this way, the minute I pull my fabric, it will pull out, and let me show you that. If I was to pin this like this, you can see when I pull it, it's going to come out, but this one's not going to come out because my pin is holding my fabric as I'm pulling on it. So we're going to come down, and I'm just going to pin it here for a moment. And what you want to do is you want to mark where that neckline is, so at the base of the neck, and then you want to mark where your bust is. So this ribbon that goes around the bust is our bust line. We're going to take the piece of fabric off, and we're going to lay it down, and we're going to square up a line going across that becomes our bust line. That's basically referred to as a horizontal balance line, so that you make sure that your grain line is going towards the ground. Gravity is going to pull the fabric that way. And then you're going to put that bust line going across your fabric by squaring it up with either your like see-through ruler that you can square up, or you can use the 90-degree one and line that up along the edge of the fabric. And that way you know your line's not dropping down or going up too high. And so I'm going to draw that line going straight across the fabric, and now I have my bust line. Okay, continuing, I think it's important. I mentioned to you that in the textbook, we're working starting on page 59, and I'm trying to stick with pretty much the steps that the book teaches you. There's other things you can do, and sometimes I don't do it exactly this way, but to get started, it's a good thing to establish a way that you do it. And following this textbook, the writer is very good at draping, and her explanations, I think, are pretty clear. Sometimes what you might want to do is go through ahead of time and kind of read through it so you have a basic concept of what we're trying to accomplish. And then I generally take a yellow marker and mark some of the important things so that I don't forget to do them. So what we're going to do is, once I marked this little area for the neck, I can cut out a little triangle of fabric, kind of something like this, just to get it out of the way so that I'll be able to work on draping the neck. I'm going to cut a little bit off the back too. And now I'm going to be able to pin this on my dress form. So I'm going to pin it at the neck and at the bust. The bust line is the most important thing that you're working on right now, trying to keep that perpendicular. So I'm going to put a pin at the center front. Let me turn it towards myself, and then I'll turn it back after I've pinned it. So I'm pinning that line at the bust, and I'm pinning the line at the neck. And this is where my neckline is going to be at the top. So you just start real simply like that. And what we're going to do next is you're going to be working always from this area down and around. Never pull your fabric really, really tight, because we don't wear our clothing that tight. You want to just gently push the fabric around. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I want to keep this horizontal line very horizontal. So I'm going to bring it across the bust, and I'm going to line it up with that line of ribbon that's underneath the fabric, and I'm going to secure it at the bust area with a couple of pins kind of crisscrossing each other so that I don't lose my bust line and have it drop down as I'm working on the rest of my drape. So we've kind of pinned it at the apex, and then the next thing that you're going to do is you're just going to start to bring this fabric around. So we're moving it around the neckline and bringing it up to the shoulder. So from this area over. So sometimes what we have to do is I'm going to put a little pin here just to hold it for a moment. And then I need to cut into the neck to release the fabric, because the fabric is flat here, and in order for it to come around the neck, it has to be released a little bit. And so we cut little notches in it, kind of like when you were making your shirt in clothing construction and you had to notch the curve of a collar. So I'm basically just going to kind of cut down into that neckline. I don't want to go past the neck. but you got to leave some fabric for the seam allowance. So you're cutting down into that neck, but not too far because you're going to be marking that neckline on the fabric. So you can see I've just cut a bunch of little clips in the neckline, and I'm going to even maybe slash it a little bit at the shoulder here just to release that fabric because I'm pushing it over and I don't want the straight squareness of the fabric to restrict the curve that I'm trying to build into my garment. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure also that I've tagged this down at the waistline so that I don't accidentally pull it over to the side at all. And I'm going to remove some of the fabric that's here at the armhole because all of this is going to restrict us shaping anything like right here. So we want to also think about the fact that the body is kind of hollow here, and we don't, again, want to pull it so tight that we're pulling the fabric into that hollow area. We want to let it bridge the hollow. And I'm going to remove some of the fabric that's at the armhole because this is going to get in my way. So basically what I'm going to do is just come around here like this and just remove a bit of the fabric. You don't want to take too much because you can't put it back, but we want to be able to drape our shoulder and our neckline without the fabric restricting the movement. So as you're smoothing the fabric, you're going to smooth it towards the shoulder, kind of wrap it to the back. And again, you're going to pin that down at the shoulder line. And then right here is where we want to make sure we don't pull it too tight. We're going to leave a little bit, let it, if it looks like it's bumping up a little bit, there's a little bubble, we're going to need that in that area. So I'm only going to come down and pin, but not pull. Some people like to, at this point, actually take about 1/8 of an inch and just put in a little bit of fabric there because we don't want it too tight around the armhole. So I like to generally just take and put a little, just a teeny pinch of fabric there so that I don't wind up pulling it up too close under the arm and having an armhole that's really too small. And so then I'm just going to bring this part over here to the side, and you'll notice that your line starts to drop a little bit. If we pull it up, you can see you're going to have too much fabric there. So it is going to drop a little bit, but it shouldn't drop way down. Because what we're going to do is the excess fabric that's here, you can see how I have a bubble, is going to become the dart. And this particular drape has what's called a side dart. Let me pause for a second here. I have to correct myself. We're going to be doing a waistline dart. So our excess fabric, and you can see there's a lot excess, is going to be at the waistline. Here at the front, we've pinned it at the very center. And what we want to do is come over to where the princess line is. And you can see the princess line is this line right here. And to that point, I'm going to cut off some of this fabric right here because this is going to restrict me from being able to manipulate over here. So basically, a lot of times what you're doing with draping is you're working to a point and then you're removing some fabric so that it frees up the next step. So here, I'm just going to put a pin. So you really want to smooth this over to the waist. We don't really want a bubble in this area. So we're going to bring this over to that princess line and pin it in place. And I'm going to cut some fabric away. So I'm going to have to turn this for a moment. So what I'm doing is I'm going to cut across. I want to leave about 1 inch below the waist because we need to have room to create our seam line. And then I'm going to bring it down, and I'm just going to cut this little bit of fabric off so that it's out of the way. So you can see what I've done is I've cut out a little square and removed it. Then what you're going to do is you're going to cut up into the waistline because, again, from our waist to our hips, we curve. And that fabric has to curve out, and it can't if it's flat. So, again, we're going to make some little nicks. So I'm just going to kind of cut up towards the waistline like this, maybe 3 times. And I've opened up the fabric's ability to curve at this point by opening those little spaces. All right. So the next thing that we're going to do, by this point you should be on about page 61. we're going to make sure that we have what's called armhole ease. So what I want to do is I'm going to use my pen to mark. And if you look at the side of your dress form, you have a metal plate. And where the side seam hits the metal plate, we want to be able to drop down and move over and bring the fabric out a little bit so that we create some wearing ease. In small scale, we're probably it's not even gonna be a full 1/8 of an inch. So what I do on this side is I'm gonna mark where that plate is, and I'm going to mark where that side seam is. So you have like a little mark you've made that looks like a T. And what we're gonna do is take the fabric and we're going to move it over a little bit, just a titch. So now my side seam is really about 1/8 of an inch over, and that's going to give me wearing ease so that the person wearing the garment can actually raise their arms and reach forward, and it's not going to cut into them. And then what you want to do next is you're smoothing down the side seam. So you're not pulling this over this way because that's going to be the dart. You're just going to come straight down. So from that point, I'm going to come straight down. I don't want to push too much fabric towards the front, and I don't want to pull from the front around to the side. I just want to hand smooth it down. And I'm going to take some pins, and I'm going to pin right where you can feel that side seam. Most dress forms have on the side seam kind of stitched where it feels like a bump, but these little half scale ones might not have that, so you might have to periodically like just look under the fabric to see, am I on that side seam? Can I feel that ribbon? And I'm going to pin it to the waist. So I've built in some wearing ease. I've got my side seam pinned in. And then the next step, let me pause for a second to make sure I've got everything ready. Okay, so now what we're ready to do is mark our side seam. Generally, I take a pencil and kind of angle it and rub, and it'll pick up that mark. But because I don't have that bumpy spot here and it's difficult for you guys to see pencil, I'm going to draw it in with my marker. So I'm just going to run down the side. Ooh, where is it? Let's see, it's hard to find it. And I'm just going to mark where that side seam is. And usually at the bottom, I like to put like a little sort of a T-shaped mark so I know where my waistline is and where that side seam is. And then generally I like to cut a little bit of it away. You can wait, but it seems to me to get in the way. So basically I'm going to come over and just cut some fabric out of the way so that I'm not working with such a big chunk of fabric. And then the next step is, in order to build in the dart, we're going to walk this fabric here over to that princess seam. And that's where I'm going to pin it. I'm going to pin it at that princess seam. Sometimes, again, it's hard to find it. So I'm going to take this other little pin out, and I'm just going to pin it to the princess seam. So I pinned it here. And then what I'm going to do is remove some of this fabric. So I'm going to come around here about 1 inch down from the waistline, and I'm going to remove fabric to where I put that pin. And then I'm going to cut up into it. I'm going to notch it in a couple different places. So now you'll be able to see that you can actually smooth this down and see how these little flaps are kind of opening up, and you can see the fabric underneath. So now it's not restricting the movement of the fabric. It's giving us plenty of space and ability to smooth this out. And the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to be putting the dart in that area. In order to make the dart, what we're looking for is a dart leg. So the dart leg is going to be right at that princess seam. So I want to make sure that that's where I've clipped it. So I'm going to clip right up to that pin, and that's going to become part of our dart leg. If you remember from pattern drafting classes, your lines on the dart, let's see if you can see this, you've got 2 lines that are your dart. Those are referred to as dart legs, and then we're going to later on place the center mark. We're not going to concern ourselves right now with that center mark because that will happen in the pattern drafting. We just want to be able to fold that dart into our fabric. So when you make a dart, if you remember from clothing construction and pattern drafting, is the extra fabric that's inside the dart always goes either towards the center or down. And so here, all my extra fabric is going to go that way, and this is going to go over top of it, and that's going to form my dart. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth this over, and I'm going to try to figure out where my dart is by folding it in. And you'll have to manipulate it probably a couple of times to get it quite right. So I think this looks good, so I would pin the dart. And again, you can notice that I haven't done this so tight that it's pulling. If you start to get horizontal lines in your drape, that means the fabric is pulled too tight. And so here's my dart that's pinned in there right now. I can go ahead and I can remove this little bit of fabric that's hanging down so that it's not in my way. And you'll remember from pattern drafting that at the widest part of the bust, it's called the apex. And so in that area, I do not want to go all the way to the tip of the bust. That kind of was a style in the 1940s when they had the sweater girls and they had very, you know, sort of conical shaped clothing that really highlighted the bust. Today we go for something that's maybe a little softer looking, and generally you want to stay in full scale, a 1-inch circle around the bust. So because we're in half scale, we're going to try to have it be maybe a 1/2 inch below. So I'm going to look here, and I don't want my dart to go any higher than this little mark I made below the bust, which is about 1/2 inch. And you can pin your dart in a couple spots if you want. That part at the top is going to be the tip of the dart. So if you hold that flat and press down on your dart, you can pin, oh, somewhere around the middle. A lot of times new students to draping try to really overpin everything and make everything super tight and super pinned. It really isn't necessary. On the small scale, if I just have one pin, and I'll move this up so you can probably see it better, you can see that the dart, I've put that 1/2 inch mark there. I've got one pin here at the center and one pin down here. So at this point, what we're ready to do is we're ready to mark everything and be able to take it off of the dress form and transfer it to paper. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stand over here so it's easier for me to do it and try to bring it up so you can see. I want to mark my neckline, so I'm feeling for where the neck ends and the body starts to come out, and it's right at the bottom of that ribbon. And so what I'm going to do is make a line, and you can do it dashed. It doesn't have to be a solid line. You're just trying to capture that line. Here at the waist, I'm going to do the same thing. And generally, everybody asks me, is it above the ribbon, below the ribbon? Just kind of go in the middle of the ribbon. So I'm going to mark my waistline all the way around. So I've marked that waistline. I think here it's slid up a little bit, so I'm gonna bring it down. If I have a thing I think that's a mistake, I usually put an X on it so I know that I've moved that line. This is our side seam over here. To mark the dart, you can do one of a couple different things. Generally, I just sort of mark it at the bottom here. So I wind up with what looks like a couple of L's when I open it up. Some people like to go across like this. And what happens is you'll line up those lines with each other. And some people like to run the pencil down and create the straight line. When it comes to truing up your pattern later on, I think less is more. The more you've heavily marked this and you need to make an adjustment, it becomes confusing as to those lines become in your mind sort of hard and fast, and this is exactly where my dart has to be, and I can't manipulate it at all. So I kind of like just a few lines that help me locate that dart, because when you go to true up your pattern, if the dart seems a little off, you might want to, you know, kind of correct it a little bit. And so everything is marked. The next thing is to mark your shoulder seam. And so for the shoulder seam, what we want to do is look at where that high point of shoulder is. We want to make sure we have a little T there. And I want to come out to my shoulder. Here's this part of the shoulder. So I'm going to add a couple lines like this. You can draw a straight line, but chances are when you go to true up the pattern, the line's not going to be 100% straight, and you're going to change it anyway. So I just kind of like to sort of dot it. And then we want to do our armhole. The armhole is generally kind of challenging because it's like, where is the armhole? The plate on the dress form is not exactly the armhole. It has to be a little bit bigger in order for it to fit an armhole. So if I look at this, if I pull my fabric down to the plate, you can see that my shoulder seam is all of a sudden dropping. Well, when we make clothing, we don't have a shoulder seam that drops down like that. So basically, I'm looking at about a 1/4 inch up seems to be the best spot for that to end. And then here under the arm, we're dropping it down about a 1/4 inch also. In full scale, it'll be a little bit different, but we're going to do some of those later on. In the half scale, I just want you to go about a 1/4 inch. And then you're going to come around and you can see this part of the armhole. Here's where the plate is. Again, that would make my garment rounded. So I'm really going to come over here. And at this point, you can take these out if you like. And don't pull your fabric too tight, but look for that plate and look for about a 1/4 inch away. I'm making an armhole. And your armhole on the front, again, if it starts to curve out, this would be too far out. You want it on that straight, flat part of the armhole. And like I said, this is kind of challenging. You will get it eventually. So I like to kind of sculpt that armhole in. And again, once you've made a lot of patterns, once you've laid out that sort of armhole curved ruler, you start to kind of understand the shape of the armhole, and you can sort of see that maybe it looks like it's sticking out too far here or it's up too high. We will work on armholes. I'm not expecting them to be really perfect. I think, like I said, it's a bit challenging, and you will eventually be able to make an armhole that really looks good. So at that point, I want to take stuff off, and what we're going to do is finish up our lines. We're going to connect them and make sure that we have everything marked really well. And then we're going to pin it and put it back on the dress form so that you can drape the back. You can drape the back separate, but generally what happens is because you didn't have the front piece on, the shoulder seam doesn't meet quite exactly, or you've got the back armhole higher or lower than the front one. So I really like to put it back on so that I can match everything up. So when I take it off, it sort of looks like this, where I've got some dotted lines. And I'm going to take my ruler and my marker, and I'm going to square up this shoulder seam. You want to make sure it's nice and straight. Same thing on the side. Mine looks a little really wonky, wavy, so I'm going to go over it with the marker and make sure I've squared it up. I like in the corners for my lines to overlap and intersect each other, because then there's no question as to where was that location. And then for the dart, you can see that I have those two lines that sort of are pointing at each other. I'm going to draw a line for the dart on each side that intersects the edge of those lines. And so I've created the dart. I'm not going to worry about truing up the end of the dart yet, because I can do that on my paper pattern. You could also take your curved ruler or your French square or French curve, and you can join these curved pieces together if you want, so that you really have a nice line. When I marked it, it's a little higher than that first little line that I created. We don't want a neckline that's so tight it's choking someone. So I'm going to use that first little line and drop my neckline down just a titch and kind of round it out so that it looks really nice. And the same thing with my armhole. I'm going to make sure that it's all connected really well so that I can double check it when I have it on my form. and I'm draping the back. Okay. So then what we're going to do is we're going to fold our dart. And remember, your excess of the dart should go towards the center front. So I'm going to fold that and pin that dart back together. I'm just going to run the pins lengthwise so that dart appears like it's been sewn. There's no need to press it or anything at this point. You can see now that I've got this really nice shape to the bodice. I'm going to trim down the bottom so it's not much more than a ½ inch, and recut those little clips so that it goes right to my line. And when I get down here, I'll hold this up closer to the camera so you can really see it. So I'm clipping that waist because we just really don't want the fabric to restrict the fit. My side seam, I'm going to cut that down so that it's about a ½ inch, like it would be a, like I was going to sew it. I'm going to do the same thing across the shoulder. I'm going to cut it so it's only about a ½ inch. And I'm going to cut into the armhole the same thing. I'm going to go around my armhole, leave about a ½ inch seam allowance. And my armhole, I'm going to clip into it, especially under the arm and around that curve. So again, the fabric isn't going to restrict the movement. So you can see, and I'm going to clip up around the neck too. That was a little tight. So you'll be able to see that this pattern piece is fully marked. I've got all kinds of little clips here. The armholes are clipped, and the waist is clipped. My dart is pinned in so that it won't move too much. And I'm going to put this back on my dress form. So I'm going to pin it at the bust, the waist. Make sure that you're putting the pins in the direction that keeps that fabric from moving, because we don't want to pull it and change the dimension at all. I'm going to pin it up here at the neck. I'm checking my shoulder. It looks good. I'm going to pin the shoulder down at the side here, and one pin up at the neck just to hold it so it's not moving. You don't want to put any pins right here because that's going to interfere with you draping the back piece. So I'm going to put it closer into the neck area so it's out of the way. And then the same thing with my side seam. I'm going to bring this over, and rather than pin it this way, it's going to be in my way when I go to drape the back. So I'm just going to kind of pin it here so that I don't have it move away from me, and just kind of hold it in place. So the next step would be to drape the back of the bodice. The back bodice has, we're going to have a dart that's at the waistline to take up that excess, but we're also going to have a dart up at the shoulder, because if you notice, our back curves up towards the shoulder. It isn't flat. So we want this to have a really nice fit, and we want to remove excess fabric. So we're going to be draping that up and removing some of that excess fabric. I'm going to pause here for a second so that I can have you a sample for you to see of the that drape. Okay, so we are now going to drape the back. We're going to drape from the center back over to the piece that we've already draped in the front. You wouldn't do it over here because then you would not be matching the shoulder seams and the side seams and the length. So you're going to take a piece of fabric that's the same size that you used before. I think it was 15 by about 8. And we're going to wind up with something that sort of looks like this. So the first thing that we're going to do is you want to mark that 1-inch line over from the center of your fabric so that you can start to drape. So you might want to hold it up and just make sure that you're going from this way over. I often get it backwards and have to flip it inside out. And you're going to take your fabric and you're going to, again, you're going to leave a couple inches at the top because we want to make sure that we have enough for the shoulder. And so I'm going to pin it at the neckline and bring it down to the waist. And I'm going to take a marker and I'm going to mark where this line is across the shoulder. If your dress form doesn't have that, you want to go back and at that center of the armhole, kind of matching where this little screw is, you'll want to add a ribbon, because that's our shoulder blade area. It's the widest part. And we don't want to work from the bust area like we did in the front. We're working from that shoulder area up to the neck and then down. So then you're going to take your piece of fabric off, and again, you want to square up that line with your ruler. I really like this metal ruler the best because I think it allows me to lay it along the edge of the fabric and make sure that I've taken my line straight across. You don't want it dropping because then it's going to skew everything that you're trying to do. So after you've done that, press that 1 inch underneath so it's nice and smooth. Make sure your fabric doesn't have any wrinkles. And then we're going to drape the back. I'm going to position my line that's at the shoulder blade first because I think that's a real important place to work from. And then I'm going to come up towards my neck and I'm going to pin the neck. And then I'm going to come down and pin at the waist. There's no need to come down and pin it here because we're not draping a skirt. We're not draping a dress. We're just doing a bodice. And so we just need those 3 pins down the back. We don't have to overpin and put a half a dozen in there because you're just taking them in and out, and it's just much easier to just have a couple pins to keep removing. Okay. If the dress form you took home is, you know, kind of old and rickety and the ribbons are coming off, you can put a little glue under, like fabric glue if you want, and glue them back down. Typically, I don't glue my ribbons, or sometimes I use twill tape for the basic markings because when they get dirty, you want to be able to remove them and replace them. But for these, they're so old and so used, I don't have a problem with them being glued down. So once we have that positioned, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come straight across with my line that's for the shoulder, and I want to pin it over here so that I'm keeping the upper part of the fabric that I'm going to work with. There'll be a dart up here, and we're going to have a dart down here to take up the excess. So one of the first things that we want to do is, once we've got this up here, is I kind of want to slide a little bit over along the neck, and I'm going to remove a little bit of fabric because it's going to be in my way. But be careful that you don't cut away too much at the shoulder. So I'm just going to take off a little bit up here at the top, just a little section, and I got to make sure that my fabric is going to come all the way to the front for that shoulder, so I didn't remove too much right here. So we're going to kind of drape that neckline. So we're going to pin it. So you're going to slide around to that where the shoulder is in the front, and I'm going to pin it in that location that intersects the shoulder in the front. And what you'll see will happen is I'm getting like some wrinkling in this area. And again, it's because this is tighter than the fabric is here. So we want to shape that neck, and we want to clip down in so that we release all of that fabric. So I'm going to bend this over so it's easier. And I'm going to just cut into the fabric at the neckline and kind of release some of that tightness so that now you'll see that it's going to lay a lot smoother in that area. And I'm going to remove the pin again and sort of come over here at the neck and the shoulder intersection and bring that all together. Pin that down. I think I need maybe a few more clips to get it a little closer. You want to come down to probably the bottom of your ribbon that you have at that spot, and you may even need more than 1 or 2 little clips so that it lays smooth. So I'm smoothing, I'm going to take a little bit more off because it's just too much fabric. It's fighting me. That'll be better. Okay. So then the next step is we're going to come across the shoulder to where the dart take-up is. So it's generally on a full-size scale, about 3 inches. So here it's going to be about maybe 1.5 inches. Let me measure this and make sure that I'm seeing. Here's my neckline. So you want to go from the high point of shoulder over to that princess line, and it's about 1.25 inches on this size one. So I'm going to come over to that spot, and I'm going to place a pin where that intersection is. And then what I'm going to do is cut into the shoulder at that point where the dart leg would be, again, so that I'm releasing some of this tightness in the fabric. And I can see that it's laying smooth along that princess line right here. We want that to be smooth. And then I'm going to build in my my dart. And again, a dart take-up that's on the inside, so underneath, is going to go towards the center. So we're going to pull the fabric in this way to create that dart. So from my shoulder, I'm going to push this fabric up to the shoulder. I'm going to put a pin like at my shoulder, and you can see that you really have not a whole lot of fabric. I have maybe a little, there's like a little wrinkle here. This little extra fabric here is going to become my dart, and I'm going to work it up underneath, and I might have to lay this baby down to get at it because it's so tall on this table, and I'm going to try to fold that dart in. Ooh, this is difficult. So I'm going to smooth the fabric towards that dart spot, the dart leg, or where the princess seam is, and I'm going to fold it over so that the excess is going towards the center, and try to get that dart to come down the back towards the princess seam. We're trying to stay on the princess seam with that dart. So let me pause for a second so I can try to manipulate this. Okay, so I've created a little dart at the shoulder. At full scale, a shoulder dart is generally never longer than 3 inches. We're not trying to create something that sticks out like we would on the bust. We're trying to just remove the excess fabric that's at the shoulder blade. So you're folding at that location right over top of your princess seam, but you're only coming down in half scale about 1.5 inches. So I put a little pin here to indicate that that's about 1.5 inches, and I've just taken the fabric and tucked it in this way. And again, it's not going to be any wider than, let's see, this sample one is about like maybe 3/8 of an inch. So it's just the tiniest little bit that you're folding over. If you make your dart too big, what will happen is you'll have a bump in the back of your dress or your shirt that sticks out. So we want to keep that nice and small. And once you've pinned it in place, I just put a pin at the top and the bottom. You don't have to pin the whole dart all the way down. I'm going to remove a little bit of fabric that's at that shoulder seam because it's kind of in my way. So I'm going to go across here and cut some of that out so that we'll be able to mark our shoulder seam. And again, here at the shoulder, I'm going to come over. Now that that's all smooth, and I pin back at the shoulder. And I'm going to remove a little bit of this fabric here from this kind of shoulder line up where the armhole is. I just want to take some of that out of the way so that it's not quite so bulky. When you leave a lot of fabric on your drape as you're going, it does restrict the next step that you're doing in the movement. So we want to make sure that we're not having so much fabric that it becomes real cumbersome. So the next step is we're going to come down to the waist in the back, and we're going to go over to where that princess seam is, because that's where our dart for the waistline is going to take place. So we go over to that princess seam and just pin that fabric down there. And like we did in the front, I'm going to remove this little bit of fabric that's at the waistline. So I'm going to drop down about 1 inch, and I'm going to cut this little section out just so that it's not in my way. It's not even more than like a 1/2 inch wide. Make sure you leave about 1 inch at the back. And then you're going to cut up into it like we did on the front waist to make sure that we release that little bit of curve we have here so that we have a nice smooth back. And if you want to make sure you don't move the center back as you're working on the dart, you could put a pin right there. And so this becomes the point where my dart leg is going to be at that princess seam. We have to be careful that we don't drape it so tight that we can't wear it. So we want to leave a little bit of ease in there. And we're going to work that dart in right there at that princess seam. If you want to look in your textbook, it's on page 64. At full scale, a dart in this area would not be any longer than about 7 inches. So we want to be careful that we don't make it too long. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to smooth my fabric over to the underarm. But again, I don't want to pull it super tight. So you don't want to take the fabric and pull. You just push with your hand, come over, and I'm just going to pin it to that side seam. And I'm going to bring that side seam down and pin it at the bottom. So again, I'm going to remove some of the fabric because I have a little bit too much up here around the armhole area. To be able to work with it. And at this underarm area, once you've got it in that location, it's the same thing that we did at the front. So I'm going to make a little T so that I can show you that I'm going to take that little space there and I'm going to add a little wearing ease. So I'm going to push back on it and give myself just a little, like maybe 1/8 of an inch or so from my side seam so that I don't have the dress so tight that I can't pull my arms forward and reach. And then I'm just going to bring this straight down. So you're not taking from the bottom and pushing this over because we're going to build in a little dart. So let this start to build up this little bump right here and bring your side down and pin it at the waistline. And then we can remove this extra fabric here and this extra fabric there so that we can actually shape the dart in our waistline. I know you feel like you're probably wasting a lot of fabric, but you really need to have that extra fabric in order so that you have enough to create your shape and it's not skimpy at the shoulders and what have you. So I'm going to take some off here and I'm going to take some off the side. And I'll be able to check and make sure my side seam looks good. So I'm just going to, I'm going to pin it over top of the other side seam, about halfway down. And if you're using a marker, you're able to see the lines through there. You'll be able to see your seam line. And then, so what we're going to do is we're just going to take this extra fabric here. I'm going to put my pin this way so that I don't actually pull too much. And I'm just going to create this little dart at the princess seam. So I'm going to hold this here and I'm going to bring this over and the fold should wind up on that princess seam. So I'm smoothing and I'm folding that dart in. I'm having a little trouble, so one thing you want to do is, again, cut up into the waistline and release it, and that will stop it from kind of resisting what you're trying to do. So I'm pulling this over and you can see I got a little fold that's right there at the princess seam, and I'm going to pin that in place, and I want to get it right on my princess seam. I don't want it to be over too far. It always looks unbalanced if it's not in that location. And so I'm just going to pin it down at the princess seam. Oops, let me try this one more time. I'm using a muslin that's a little bit too stiff and too thick. I think I'm going to next time work with the bleached muslin. I don't like this unbleached, and they starch it too much. It's stiff. Okay, so I've got that folded there at the waistline. So let me turn it this way so you can see better. And so I've taken the fabric and it's going this way underneath, and I'm looking for that princess seam, and I really want the top of my dart to sort of be right on that princess seam. So this fabric is fighting me a little because of the starchiness, but we can always correct it when we do the paper pattern. If it seems like, when you're looking at it, if it seems like your dart is going off in an angle, we can straighten it up. When we draft the paper pattern, the end of our shoulder dart and our bust dart should actually intersect. Like if I bring this center line from that dart to the shoulder line, and I bring the center line of this one up, they should intersect. If they're off, then that's when you want to create the dart. And we'll talk more about that when we're looking at creating the paper pattern and truing everything up. So this is good enough for now. I'm going to just also sort of just tack the center of the dart. So you want to look it over. Does everything look nice and smooth? Do we have enough wearing ease? I do have one little strange wrinkle here that I think it's because of this fabric being so stiff, and it might need my side seam might need a little adjustment. So I think if I trim some of that fabric away, because again, this piece of fabric that's a little bit on the long side seems to be causing me to get a wrinkle. So I'm going to trim that up a bit. I'm going to trim a little bit around the armhole. I want to make sure I have it not too sticking out too far, because I'm just trying to check it. And I don't like this wrinkle I have here, but we'll figure out what it is later on. Maybe it's just not enough in the dart at that point. So don't get too uptight about a few wrinkles and what have you, because we'll work it all out when we get to the pattern. So at this point, I want to mark everything. So again, I'm going to mark my waistline with just a few lines. I can connect them later. And when I come over here to where it overlaps, I'm really looking for the mark I had underneath so that it's in the same location. This is where most people run into a little difficulty, is later on their side seams, the front or the back is longer, and they miss it when they true it up in paper. So we want to make sure that we check that stuff in paper. I'm going to look over here. Where's my underarm? I'll do the same thing with my darts. I like to make a little sort of L-shaped thing here at the bottom and just do one of these things. I know I want my dart to end right about there, so I'm just putting a little dot. This dart up at the shoulder, I'm going to put a little dot here, and then I'm looking for my shoulder line that's underneath, and I can see my black line under there. So I'm going to mark that, come straight across. I'm going to mark right below my ribbon at the neckline, and again, really make sure that you pay attention to those intersections, because a lot of times I'll see that students like did this and they did this and they didn't finish that corner, and then they're not sure where that corner ended up. And then the same thing that we did in the front with the armhole, we're looking to be where this is flat. When it starts to curve, that would be the sleeve. So we want to come over here. I don't really want it there. That's too curvy. I need it to be like right about here. Okay, and then I'm going to mark my side seam. I can actually see the line through my fabric. So I'm just putting a couple little dashes to kind of mark that side seam. And then we're going to do what we did before when we took it off of the dress form. And we're going to mark everything with our ruler, square it all up, trim it down so that we have, our 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then we're going to pin it back together. So I'm going to lay this down. I'm going to use my rulers. You should always do a ruler. Don't think that you're going to be good at freeform tracing something. Technical patterns should be done with a ruler, and I don't want to see like real jaggedy, shaky lines. So here I'm looking at my side seam, and some of it doesn't look exactly straight, so I got to square it up with the ruler. And I always err on the side of making it looser than tighter, because you can always take it in, but if it's too tight, it's too small. So I'm just going to move over there and make a straight line. I'm going to make my darts, mark those. It's a very small dart. It looks like my dart's maybe a little crooked. We might have to move it on the paper pattern. Again, the dart at the shoulder has to be put in. Square up your shoulder seam. Use your curvy ruler to kind of connect all the lines on the neckline. And remember, your center of the neckline at the back should be straight. If you curve that at all, you'll wind up with something that does this, and it'll look really silly. So I'm just going to connect that all together. True up or straighten up your armhole. Some of those little marks were a little off, but we're close. And then my waistline, I'm going to connect those lines. Remember, your waistline is not square, it's curvy. And then I'm going to do what I did in the front. I'm going to pin my darts. Pin them back in. And you only need a couple pins. You're just trying to check the fit and the position. Oh, trim all your areas down to about 1/2 inch so you don't have too much fabric that you're overlapping. I'm going to trim around the neck here. Make sure that you've released that seam enough that it will lay smooth. Trim up this armhole a little bit. Doesn't need to be that big. You're generally going to be working with 1/2 inch seam allowances. Whoops, I nicked it a little. Same thing at the waist. I'm going to clean it up a little bit, make it easier to work with. And then we're going to pin these pieces together, and we're going to make sure that it fits our dress form. So make sure you clip around that armhole, because it does pull if you don't. Clip right up to the seam allowance or the marking that you made. Okay, I'm going to pin in my shoulder dart. And you'll notice the shoulder dart, again, it's really short. It's not long. And then this one is about, it's about 3.5 inches. And this one's about 1.5 inches or 1 3/4 inches. And you can see that if I was to draw a line to here and then down, which I'll do, let me do that right now so that you can see that they do intersect. So if this is the middle of my dart, you don't have to do it on your muslin because you'll do it on your paper pattern. But you can see that I was able to connect those two darts, so they're in the right location. This line should pretty much follow that princess seam. So pin this. Pinning my darts. And I'm going to take my front piece off, and I'm going to pin it to this one along the side seam and along the shoulder. And then I'm going to put it on, and I'm going to make sure that, my side seams are the same length, that my shoulder seam is in the right location, and that it's the same length. And I'm going to put it back on. So generally, I lay my back piece down. I'm going to take the front off. Don't unpin your darts. They're fine. We just want to make sure that this is going to fit. So generally what I like to do is I like to fold the front shoulder seam on that line and kind of just finger press it, and then lay it over top of your back, and with a couple pins, pin it into place near the shoulder and near the neckline. And then do the same thing with the side seam, fold it over. And usually I like to match up the waistline, and if it's off at the underarm, make a correction there. So I'm going to pin this in a couple spots. And then I'm just going to slip it back on my dress form. And I'm just going to pin it at the neck and the waist. So I'm pinning my back at the neck and the waist. And if you've done it correctly, there shouldn't be any pulling. You shouldn't have a hard time getting it to the center. If now that it's pinned together, if you have trouble getting the center to the center and you have to really tug on it, then you've made it a little bit too tight. And we want to make sure that we, make something that's really going to be wearable. Generally, I find most people make something too tight. They don't make it too loose. You guys like to wear your clothing kind of a little more form-fitting, and you're used to knits that give. And so you want to work on that. So I want to check it over, and I'm looking to see if my waistline is nice and even. It's not like higher in the front or lower in the back. Let's pull it down a little bit. I'm checking to see, does my armhole match up here, or do I need to make an adjustment? And you can see that there is some wearing ease here under the arm. I'm looking at my shoulder seam to make sure that the shoulder is the same length, and I can see that my front shoulder is maybe a little longer. And so a lot of times what I'll do is get a colored pen. Excuse me for a moment. I have a purple one here, and I'm going to just make a little adjustment here that my neckline needs to be there. So it's a different color, and I'll know that I've made a change, and I can incorporate that change into truing up the fabric or pattern. When we true up the pattern, we will look for those spots where things don't line up, and we'll make those adjustments. It looks to me like here I'm up a little high at the waist and in the front, so I'm going to just mark that really needs to come down a little bit in that location. And sometimes I put little hash marks through the mistake and then come over like this. So I think that looks pretty good for now. And so the next thing is we'll be taking this off. We will unpin it. If you need to press it, be careful that you don't stretch it or change anything. Most of the time you just want to kind of smooth it out by hand. And then next week what we'll be doing is we'll be making the pattern and truing it up and making sure that the pattern is perfect before we go ahead and cut one. So then we'll cut the full-sized piece and make an entire model of it. When we make the model, we're not going to make it as if we're finishing a garment, so there's going to be no facings. You will not take your neckline, the armhole, or the waist and turn them under and stitch them down. But I am going to require that they're marked. Either you marked them by transferring the line, or you take your sewing machine and you sew like you're stay stitching and do your clipping. I want to see that we can see where that neckline is. So either marked or done with stitching so that it shows up. And do not close the back of a model that you make to put on your dress form, because we have to be able to get it on. So we sew the center front, or the center front will be cut on the fold. The back would have a seam in it like a dress would have a zipper. So that will just be turned under, and you'll be able to pin it together and show me that it fits the dress form. So that's it for this week. Any questions, make sure that you send me email or messages saying I'm stuck at a certain point. If you need to, we can FaceTime individually, or we can do small groups on Zoom or what have you, and share our experience and where we're struggling and where we're doing well. And any feedback you can give me would be helpful, because this is the first time that I'm videotaping some lessons rather than doing them in the classroom. And I also would like to find out if you think the video works well, or do you think that slides would be better. I can do either one. I don't really care. I want it to be something that really works for you and that you're comfortable and that you understand everything. I apologize for the fact that this is in my basement and the lighting isn't really good and the background is very messy looking. This is where the magic happens, and I have a lot of stuff. I'm setting up a studio space in a building of a friend of mine, and I'm going to try doing the videos there where I can have a backdrop and have less distraction in the back, less possibility of someone walking through the room or a cat yowling or the laundry going. Better lighting and just a better setup. So that's what we'll do the next video that we do. So good luck, get busy, and this is the assignment for this week. Thanks.